Welcome to Adventures in Infosec, where we explore the world of cybersecurity through leaders in the field. Today is my great pleasure to welcome Charles Henderson, the global managing partner and head of X-Force at IBM. I've known Charles for more than a couple decades, so I'm really excited to have him on the pod. Hey, Charles.
Hey, Lucas, how's it going?
I am excited to talk to you. So I'm going to start out with your long and storied history. How did you get into cybersecurity?
Well, I I think many of us in sort of our generation have the unique story of getting into cybersecurity before it was really an industry. Um, you can call it independent study or whatever, but I look back, sort of the early conferences that were, and I use the term conference loosely. There were presentations, some on topic, and I mean some. You kind of had to figure out what the topic was, but they were always um, they were always enlightening, if not inspiring. And really, it was more of a curiosity at that point than a job. And, I thought I was going to be a lawyer when I grew up because both my parents were lawyers, and that's just kind of what you do, you know. And in fact, I would have been a fourth generation lawyer. And about the time I was getting close to graduating from university, um, there was an emergence of this industry. And even then, the industry, it just meant that you could get a job as a penetration tester, which was like
Making
amazing.
it for a living, everybody's dream.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that, and there were people that were hiring security folks without even really having a any kind of work for them to be doing. I mean, it was like, hey, we need a security person. Do you want to come work for us? Or and I kind of zeroed in on service providers, small consultancies.
Yeah, what was your first gig? I actually don't remember this.
Oh, this is a great story. I got hired out of school by a joint venture between a Austin venture capital group and Deutsche Telekom's subsidiary, Secunet, Secnet. And I was there for 2 weeks. And my first payday, they had a company-wide meeting and announced they couldn't make payroll because the Germans. That was my first job. I can't recall if I ever got paid for those 2 weeks. I'm sure I did because you know I would have harassed otherwise. But um, from the ashes of that, I ended up working for that German parent company's subsidiaries. Um,
Yeah. If memory
it,
serves, you actually lived abroad for a couple years?
yeah, yeah, in Germany. And uh, it was uh, it was a great experience in that it kind of it was a baptism by fire, and it gave me a lot of business experience as well. And coming out of that, understanding how to do fundraising, how to start up a company, it really helped me in every step along the way since then, founding AI security, uh, to build and kind of create spider labs and within Trustwave, and then to build up X-Force, which was, really a dilapidated brand, and we reinvented it, built
All
it
right, so
from.
you jumped ahead. Let me take you back before we get there because I do want to do Spider Labs before that. But actually, You have a fun fact about you. You have not missed a home game for.
I broke that streak over COVID.
Oh, tell people what the streak was because I still think the time in Germany is the most impressive piece of that entire story. So,
Yes, I had a streak of University of Texas home games dating back to 1983 that was broken in 2020. Um, and I had not missed a University of Texas home game over that time, including when I lived in Germany, because part of my employment agreement was they had to fly me home for all UT home games. For the youngins that are listening, this was during the dot-com boom, and some ludicrous agreements were made during that period that made it really obvious why it failed. Um, I was younger when I made the demand, but honestly, it probably kept me sane. It gave me uh, a chance to get home, and it made it less trying to be over there. But I really enjoyed my time in Germany. That is where my mother was born. It's where that side of the family's from. So it was great to sort of reconnect with those roots. I would go see aunts and uncles on the weekends and get
nice.
lost in the German train system. But in retrospect, that was a really neat time for me within the industry because not only was I learning through self-education, vulnerability research, that type of thing, but I was also learning about how to run a business. And part of that was learning how to run a business in sort of different cultures because there's different aspects to it. I think it prepared me to be more of a global leader than a regional leader when the time came. You look at whether it be X-Force, Spy Labs, working in a global economy and having a global team, you really need to understand the the differences that may exist regionally, culturally, etc.
Cool. So let's jump into Spider Labs because that was one of the formative things that kind of really I'll say put you on the map outside of a smaller piece of the industry into the larger piece.
Hmm.
So why don't you explain what Spider Labs is and who you're working for? Give us that piece of the story.
So, one of our mutual friends, Jacob Carlson, called me up and said, "Hey, this firm that I'm working for merged with another firm. It was Amber and Trustwave, and for a while it was Amber and Trustwave was the name of it because that just rolled off the tongue. And they're like, from a branding perspective, we can't pass up on this genius. They eventually took it back down to Trustwave, but um, he was working for this largely compliance shop, and that didn't really excite me. I was really much more interested in you know what we were at the time calling cool stuff, right? And what I quickly realized was no, I was actually very interested in the compliance shop because having a group that was multifaceted, had different business lines so that you weren't the only business line, allowed you to secure investment for growth. It allowed you to do some pretty cool stuff. That diversification, that wider portfolio.
So what was Spider? What was the mission of Spider Labs inside of Trustwave? So Trustwave's
It
big
was
brand,
it was
compliance.
the elite security services. So it was the penetration testing, the incident response, the vulnerability research, the threat intelligence. So you're really combining those. It was really a similar mission to X-Force, but on a smaller scale. It was mid-market mostly. We did have some, enterprise, but it wasn't quite as top of the market like X-Force has become.
So you
Uh,
ran Spider Labs, and then so give us the high level. I ran Spider Labs for X years, and then I moved on to IBM because everybody goes to IBM.
yeah, well, now, so, you know, Spider Labs, started over there. It was Nick Picoco was uh, running, and it was kind of his baby. And quickly came in and they were just doing a lot of compliance penetration testing and PCI. And I convinced Nick to let me start up on an application security testing arm of Spider Labs. And very quickly, that became one of our central missions within Spider Labs was doing that application testing. From just a size and scope capability, it grew very quickly. Um, and um, we had Andy Bocor, who was one of the co-founders of Amberon, who really um, uh, helped us in that mission. And then when Nick left, I largely folded under Andy and took sort of a more central role in um, being that being sort of a face of Spider Labs, especially externally. Did a lot of PR. Really moved from being somebody that would speak at hacker conferences to somebody that would speak in a more public facing role to non-hackers, which was really a shift for me. I remember as I got started in PR, I had several people that helped me along the way. Abby Ross was, PR person, and she really sort of coached me and helped me understand that, hey, you're not speaking to your friends here. I mean, they may watch it, but really you're speaking to somebody, that has never been on your professional radar. They need to understand it for it to be compelling. And as I developed that sort of that public persona, it really sort of helped me even in the running of the business, because I was really better able to connect with a lot of clients, I think. Um, uh, Media training does an amazing thing. And pretty quickly, I was not only, dealing with clients, I was dealing at the board level. So I was doing a lot of board briefings and things like that, which it's strange to say, but my media training became quintessential there because, um, one of the things you're always prepared for in media training is the unexpected question. Um, and there's nothing like a board meeting to get something out of the blue, because you have such diverse figures in a lot of these boards that one of them may just be playing stump the chump, or they may have legitimate questions that some of which you may never have heard before. So you've got to be able to think quickly. And it really did help me. And quickly, I sort of earned a reputation as a trusted person you could board. And um, you know, it started out with boards of like you know video game companies and things like that, and it quickly moved to major financials in New York. And, pretty soon, I was like speaking to people that spoke like the Peter Schmitz and Family Guy, and you it was a very quick evolution, I would say. Um,
So let's use that as the jumping point. How did you end up at IBM? Because that wasn't an obvious choice at the time, I would say.
no, and a mutual friend of ours, um, when IBM reached out, a mutual friend of ours, Aziz Gulani, told me, you've got to take that interview, um, if only as a courtesy, because there's so many people, ex-IBMers, that are out in the VC world. If you're ever raising money, you're gonna run across somebody and piss them off. Uh, and so I went to Armand to take the interview, and I remember there's a guy named Chris Essenplayer, who I still talk to this day. He's a great resource. He's the CEO over at Deep Seas now, but at the time he was the GM of IBM Security Services, and he was very blunt about the fact that they were off track and everything was messed up. And he knew I was interviewing elsewhere, but here I could really create and really independently do something that I wouldn't have the opportunity to elsewhere. And so that conversation stuck with me. You know, he said, somewhere, everywhere else, you'll be executing someone else's vision. Here, it's your vision. You tell us what to do. And he, to his credit, those were not just recruiting words. When I got in, he really, he taught me a lot about being a general manager, because he took a step back and he enabled rather than trying to exert undue influence on something that he really didn't understand. He knew the outcome he wanted, but he didn't know how to get there. If he knew how to get there, I wouldn't have been there. Um, and he really gave me all the tools I needed, would go to bat for me, and focused on, Charles, what do you need, rather than, Charles, what are you doing? You know, and the results quickly spoke for themselves. And so that really got me more buy-in at the executive level. And, you know, as an executive, you have executives too. And very quickly, Chris um, was becoming my biggest champion. And, you know, anytime you're succeeding, whether you're the CEO or you're an individual contributor, you know, the CEO has champions on the board. The individual has champions above them in the organization. Somewhere in the organization, you need a champion, because it is enormously difficult, even as a founder, to do things alone. And there is a misconception that your champions always need to be above you in the hierarchy, in the org structure. I think very often some of your directs, or maybe even, you know, somebody that you're your second level manager of, they can be your champions too. They can champion up. But it's really important from a cultural perspective to know that you have people that you depend on, and that will go to bat for you. You know, go that extra mile.
Yep. So you brought, I'm going to take this a little bit differently, only in that, like, you brought back an old brand that was a favorite of ours when it first came out. So X-Force. So give the quick, maybe 30-second history of X-Force, and then, you know, what you guys did with it over the last few years.
Sure, and it was the elite group in an old company called ISS that IBM had acquired, and became a large part of IBM security.
Internet security systems, right? Like back when
Yeah,
that was a novel name for a company, as opposed to
yeah,
most
yeah.
thing you could think of, right?
I mean, you know, you know, it's kind of like Kleenex at the day. You know, I don't know who their main competitor is, but never heard of them. You know,
Yep.
um, it was they were the only show in town back then. It was one of the first. And X Force just had this. I mean, it was all our friends, and you know, they had this sense of pride and swagger, and it had really. I mean, it didn't really exist anymore. You'd see the name applied to things that didn't really in any way connect to that old image. So we started up this sort of new group, and it was the offensive security group within IBM. It was X-Force Red. It was a throwback to X-Force. Very quickly after I started, a woman by the name of Wendy Whitmore came in and started X-Force Iris, which was when we learned that you couldn't use the word blue to refer to a product offering in IBM, because we wanted to use blue. Iris, Incident Response and Intelligence Services, just rolls off the tongue, uh, uh, was going to be the IR and Intel. Um, and I mean, we were putting up video game numbers for years, because when you're starting from nothing, I mean, and you get growth, it's like your growth percentage is crazy, and you know, you're hitting all your metrics, and we just uh, knocked it out of the park, you know, um, and um, really started to grow. And then all of a sudden, you know, I sort of take survey my surroundings and realize I've built an honest to God big business. And it, we're starting to do a lot of national TV appearances. We're hitting all our business metrics. Um,
Can you give us a rough idea of how big you are at this point?
Unfortunately, no. As a publicly traded firm, I really can't speak to
Understood.
financial.
Worth asking.
Big. I mean, the thing is, we're hitting all our success. About that time, Wendy left IBM to go to another firm, and they kept Iris sort of off the side for a little bit, and then um, uh, came to me and said, "Hey, we're ready to unify X-Force." And I remember when I interviewed with at some point, I said, you need to start them as separate missions because really you need the focus to build an offensive security group and an IR group and an intelligence group. And those are different cultures. And just at least initially, they need time to sort of build their own identity. And we're finally ready to, unify it. And so I went from managing partner and head of X-Force Red to managing partner and head of X-Force overnight. And we unified the groups, and it turned out they really had a similar sense of humor, which I think was the unifying factor. But off we went, and it just, I think, it was an amazing journey, and it was kind of neat to finally sort of realize that goal that we'd started several years before of having a unified X-Force.
Nice. All right. So I'm going to take us in an entirely different direction now and talk about the industry at large a little more. You got a really interesting catbird seat. You get to work IBM. You get to work with everybody. You get to see everything. So what are the issues in the industry that keep you up at night? Like, what's interesting to you in 2024?
Well, I mean, the thing that I think scares me the most is that the industry isn't all that mature yet. And we've been going at it for decades, and we still have the problem of rallying behind a silver bullet product or service and saying this is what's going to finally solve security, at least from a marketing standpoint. And we still have a problem demonstrating return on investment for security. And this is important from a business perspective. It's important from a delivery perspective. I don't care if you're running a, billion-dollar ARR security firm, or whether you're a, penetration tester doing or a red teamer doing a adversary simulation engagement. You your work as a security professional needs to demonstrate some level of ROI. Why are we doing this? And it doesn't necessarily need to be the traditional ROI from a business sense. It's helpful for a lot of people above you if it is, but your activities should demonstrate, hey, this is worth doing. Here's why. Here's the benefit you get from this activity. Because otherwise it's just a distraction. Okay. And we have more trouble as an industry demonstrating ROI than any other industry I've seen. And the longer that continues, the less people will be bought into our mission. And, it's one of the things that I really harp on with my teams is, at the tail end of this, people need to understand why they did it in the first place. And I think very often we hear, oh, this is great data, and we think that that's enough. Great data is wonderful, but if you cannot use it, it's also completely and utterly meaningless. And I think we have a problems as an industry with that final hurdle, applicability of data. I mean, you can look at like the threat intelligence world, and we dump all this threat intelligence in the CISO. And you ask the CISO, hey, do you have good threat intelligence? Yeah. Well, how are you using it? And there's a long pause there.
So I want to dig in on this because I've, threat intelligence platforms, tips, I've never really understood them well, which is a astonishing thing to have to admit given what we do. But can you explain kind of what's the promise there and where they're failing to deliver?
The promise is that you're going to be so informed that everything you do is going to have context. But the problem is that if you're not contextualizing on the fly, really not just giving the data a presentation layer, but actually working it into the things you do, if you have to connect those dots on the fly, you're really counting on the fact that everyone in your security team, every vendor you use, everybody is up to date on the threat intelligence, is just going to work it into everything they do. And the simple fact is that's not true. The biggest problem we have in, I think, threat intelligence today or security today is that we really need to be contextualizing everything we do with threat intelligence. And we may even think we do. We may even have products that tell us that's what they're doing. But the inherent problem is it's very difficult in security and in anything you do to contextualize on the fly. And
So give me an
if
example.
you have to tell, if everyone always is hot on AI right now. The one thing that would be really cool if AI managed to do is actually help us with this, you know?
So what's your dream product that does that? Like, what's the intel source, and then how does it get surfaced to
If I had a
this?
dream product that did that, we would be having a much different conversation on this call. What I
But
would
what
say,
would it look like?
what I would say is you almost need each individual product at this point to have a mission to better leverage the information available to contextualize everything that they do. Whether it's something as simple as um, ASM, attack surface management. If they're leveraging Intel very, very well, and it sort of solves that segment, but you really need all of your products doing it. And I think you also need greater unification of threat intelligence. The other, I think, downside is you have so many disparate sources now, and the tip's supposed to unify that, but in reality, we've really kind of siloed the threat intelligence industry.
So let me give an example and tell if I got it right, because I think I had an aha moment there, which is your attack surface management. You've got a list of bugs you're supposed to fix. They're 1 through 1,000 or whatever. And if your tip said, "Oh, by the way, there's a new exploit out for bug number 12," it'd come from number 12 up to number 1, and do it in real time. Does that
I
sound like?
mean, ideally, it doesn't say it in your tip because you don't want to have to go to a second screen of glass to see why something's important. Okay,
Sure, it'd pull that information in and say, "I'm
all that
moving this."
information in, and CVSS is a crappy way to go about fixing things. Okay, so look, if you know that, and this is something we do for clients, but you know, there's there's a lot of ways it can be used outside of the vulnerability space, but I'll use the vulnerabilities as an example. If you know you have 15 vulnerabilities to fix, one of them is theoretically exploitable, but there's no exploits. One of them is just frankly not exploitable. One of them, there are 5 exploit kits being sold currently on the dark web, and the rest of them are lower ranking issues. Right now, the most important one you've got is the one that has all these exploit kits being sold on the dark web because it actually is A, it's being utilized, B, it has value because people are actually making money selling exploit kits for it. There's all these things pointing to that one being the most important. But if you don't have that data, you're treating them all equally. And let's be honest, The average enterprise class firm has something like 1.5 million unpatched vulnerabilities at any given time. So looking at that, and you're saying some sort of focus is required, and that's supposed to be what the mission of threat intelligence, but it only works if it's pervasive everywhere. It's got to be unified, and when it's siloed, you end up with individual silos becoming sort of the squeaky wheel where they're getting attention only because they're threat led, and everything else is just getting ignored because you don't know what to do with it.
Got it. Cool. All right. So we're running late on time, so I'm going to move quickly into the rapid fire questions. So let me start out with what if someone's just getting into cybersecurity or is trying to learn about the industry, what's a resource you love?
You know, so I really enjoy the security meetups, especially the vulnerability research ones. If you can get one in your area where people talk about the cool projects they're doing. Um, I also love sort of the hacker spaces, just because I'm a big believer that there's a social nature to discovery. And look, I love books. I love blogs. We have a great one over at Security Intelligence for X-Force. Um, that said, actually, you think back to when we got our start, a lot of it was sort of that social nature, working with others, learning from others, being having more back and forth, I think is key to really taking that next step. Finding mentors in the space that can help you, I think is exceptional. Um, Look, there are other resources that are good, and I don't mean to take away from them, but if you have any kind of uh, you know resource that uh, is more social in nature in the way of a meetup, I think that goes a long way. You think back to also when we got our starts, all the meetups we used to have, we got together, and it was, I think, that it was a motivation factor, but it was also uh, a rallying cry. Plus, the regular meetups kind of keep you focused.
Yeah, you got deliverable, right? You got to impress
Yeah,
everybody next month.
I really like the ones that actually require you to present every so often because it reminds you to do the cool stuff.
So back in our day, I'll say it was like 2600 was one of them. And what
Yeah.
is it? DEF CON? Like who's doing that today? Like where would someone go? Do you have any idea? Because you talk to younger hackers more than I do these days.
Well, I mean, like in Austin, we have AHA, and that's really cool. I think they've become a little bit more disparate, but you do have DEF CON meetups that I think are really great. Of course, I'm very partial to Black Hat and DEF CON, but um, uh, I uh, I really think that those meetups go a long way. I mean, now keep in mind some of them become sort of more social meetings than say
Nothing wrong with that.
technology meetings. I think both are important. But look for a technical mentor as you start going to those meetings and you're getting started and saying, "Hey, who can I really work on some neat projects?" And don't just work sort of in the abstract fashion. You need to set goals for yourself, have a project, have what is the goal of this project? Think about it in like a more precise project plan kind of thing.
All
And as you do that, you kind of build discipline into yourself, Um, I think I think it's important for people to actually have a little bit more in the way of um, a little bit more rigor in their research. And I think back to some of the people that have really done well with our industry, and I think they have that rigor where they're working on a more strict schedule with what they're doing. It's not abstract.
Yep. All right, last one. Favorite book? Who you love? What do you love?
So look, I like to read, but sort of going with that last question. How do you start out? There is this book that I ran across at uh, of all places, a Disney management training years ago where and you didn't think Disney was going to come up here. I'm going to get your podcast sued by mentioning Disney as many times as possible. So Disney, Disney, Disney. Anyway, um,
You're the mouse. Go on.
yeah. So there's this book, Creating Magic. I'm going to butcher the last name, but it was Lee Cockerell, I think. That's what Google's for. Um, but Creating Magic, and it was all about like branding and sort of the lessons learned at Disney and the management system. And it really, I think, helped me as I got into bigger organizations trying to build a healthy culture, brand, and product, and really understanding how the market perceived our product and making the product better. I think it was really meaningful. And what's weird is I started recommending it to some of the hackers on the team and stuff like that. A lot of them started coming back. And I don't know, maybe they're just trying to shine me or whatever. But they were, uh, they were, they were telling me, hey, this is actually pretty cool. So it's an odd recommendation given all the books that I could be recommending here, but I'm going to try and do one that no one on your podcast has ever recommended or will ever recommend again. So,
Love it. All right. Well, that's gonna be our conversation. Anything you want to plug before we sign off?
I would encourage people to check us out on securityintelligence.com. Uh, SI is um, probably one of my favorite blogs, and we do a lot of contributions there, and that's no small measure. Um, and hey, reach out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever. I always love making new connections. I'm sorry, X, and still haven't really adopted that. And more than anything, I look forward to seeing everybody at the next conference.
Thank you, Charles. It's been really a pleasure having you on the pod. Cheers.
Hey, great catching up.
All right. Bye.